Hello and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to U of T Mississauga's three-part webinar series entitled Do Later Life Healthcare Transitions Have to Be This Hard? And so this is our third and final session called Walk a Mile in Their Shoes. And before we begin, I'd like to share a little bit about my background. My name is Rafaida Mohammed. I graduated from UTM in 2014, and I'm happy to be here today representing my fellow UTM alumni. I'm a dedicated social worker and mental health clinician with a background of working with various for-profit and non-for-profit organizations. Over the years, I've had the privilege of developing and leading numerous workshops and programs that address crucial mental health issues. During the pandemic, I also created a web therapy program to ensure that support was accessible by vulnerable groups of people when it was needed the most. And so I'm passionate about making a positive impact and helping others navigate their mental health journeys. And now, although this event takes place online, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. We start by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territories of Treaty 13A, 1419 of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and unceded territories. We are grateful to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation as the caretakers of this land and recognize the benefits we receive from this land. This land continues to be home for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We thank them and other Indigenous groups who have walked before us and share this land with us. Almost 800 alumni and friends have registered for today's webinar, which shows what an important topic this is for so many of us. The following presentation will encompass the following details. So there will be a moderator question and answer period towards the end, and we encourage you to submit questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you're having any kind of technical difficulties, please use the Q&A to send a message to one of our staff who will respond to you privately. And the chat function on this webinar will be deactivated so that we can keep focused on today's presentation. Now I'm delighted to introduce our presenter, Heather Snyder. As a teenager in Oakville, Heather was introduced to the world of elderly care by way of early employment in assisted living and helping family members through their palliative years and home. Champion Family Consulting was conceptually born in 2007, while professional opportunities in hospitality, adult education, sales, and leadership training were helping her to build a collection of complementary skills. With the support of her family, this mom of two added nursing to her repertoire. Well done, Heather. And with a compassionate, creative, and out-of-the-box approach to classically confounding challenges, Heather has an intimidable flair for clearing the fog surrounding later life transitions. During Q&A, Heather will be joined by her colleague, Anne Russell. So now, without further ado, I want to welcome our guest speaker, Heather Snyder.
Thank you so much, Rafaida. I am just going to screen share here with you guys. All right, there we go. Rafaida, you can see that first slide okay? Awesome. Okay. So yes, welcome to the third and final installment of our series, Walk a Mile in Their Shoes. You kind of already know who we are at this point, but as Rafaida said, Anne and I actually were able to get together in the same room today, so we wanted to provide a more conversational style Q&A session for you, since today's topic is so varied and subjective, just like chatting with 100 or so of our closest friends. No big deal. I will also preface the subject matter by telling you that we know what we talk about today is easier said than done. Dealing with others, particularly family members, in times of high stress and unpredictable timelines can feel impossible and defeating at times. So we definitely don't expect these ideas and strategies to be adopted overnight. As you can see from our little table of contents here, there's a heavy focus on empathy, communication techniques, and difficult situations you may run into or possibly have already been through with family and loved ones. But what we hope to share is a number of tips and techniques that we've found effective with clients and their families. Just as there are only 7 basic narrative stories to tell, we've also found that the same is true in the elder care journey. Different characters, plot lines, settings come into play, but we certainly see a pattern running throughout, and a lot of sort of repeat issues. The solutions then also repeat themselves accordingly. So walk a mile in their shoes. What do I mean by that? Before you judge another person, try to understand their situation from as many angles as possible. But how do we do this? Why should we try? What would we want when we're the one facing a healthcare transition? We came across this video, a TED Talk by Jane Fonda, actually, a number of years ago, and it captures what she calls the third act of life. And it so eloquently explains later life transition. We wanted to share it with you. We're not going to watch the whole thing, but just a little clip. The volume on this video is set to be quite loud, and I wasn't able to adjust it. So I'm just going to give everyone about a 5-second countdown to turn your volume down a little bit so it doesn't blast you when I press play. So I will get this on in 5, 4. That's what I thought. Sorry, guys.
There have been many revolutions over the last century, but perhaps none as significant as the longevity revolution. We are living on average today 34 years longer than our great-grandparents did. Think about that. That's an entire second adult lifetime that's been added to our lifespan. And yet, for the most part, our culture has not come to terms with what this means. We're still living with the old paradigm of age as an arch. That's the metaphor, the old metaphor. You're born, you peak at midlife and decline into decrepitude. Age as pathology. But many people today, philosophers, artists, doctors, scientists, are taking a new look at what I call the third act, the last 3 decades of life. They realize that this is actually a developmental stage of life with its own significance, as different from midlife as adolescence is from childhood. And they are asking, we should all be asking, how do we use this time? How do we live it successfully? What is the appropriate new metaphor for aging? I've spent the last year researching and writing about this subject, and I have come to find that a more appropriate metaphor for aging is a staircase, the upward ascension of the human spirit, bringing us into wisdom, wholeness, and authenticity. Age not at all as pathology, age as potential. And guess what? This potential is not for the lucky few. It turns out most people over 50 feel better, are less stressed, less hostile, less anxious. We tend to see commonalities more than differences. Some of the studies even say we're happier. This is not what I expected, trust me. I come from a long line of depressives. As I was approaching my late 40s, when I would wake up in the morning, my first 6 thoughts would all be negative. And I got scared. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to become a crotchety old lady. But now that I am actually smack dab in the middle of my own third act, I realize I've never been happier. I have such a powerful feeling of well-being. And I've discovered that when you're inside oldness, as opposed to looking at it from the outside, fear subsides. You realize you're still yourself, maybe even more so. You know, Picasso once said, it takes a long time to become young.
So we're going to stop it there, but we really liked how our buddy Jane frames it in that when you're inside oldness, as opposed to looking in, the fear subsides and you really do feel more like yourself. And I think families and those looking in do tend to sort of lose sight of that. I'm now going to read you a poem that I was introduced to in the 2nd semester of nursing. So we were starting out in a long-term care placement, and the origins of the poem are widely debated. It was originally said that it was found in the closet of a long-term care facility in England, written by the resident who lived in the room. I'm not really sure if that's true, but as a source of perspective that I think we all can use as a really good reminder, it was very, very powerful for me and my classmates. And so it doesn't matter if you're a practicing nurse or if you're a caregiver of a family member or a loved one or a friend. Just want to share this with you. What do you see, nurse? What do you see? What are you thinking when you look at me? A crabbed old woman, not very wise, uncertain of habit with faraway eyes, who dribbles her food and makes no reply when you say in a loud voice, I do wish you'd try. Who seems not to notice the things that you do and forever is losing a stocking or shoe. Who, unresisting or not, lets you do as you will. With bathing and feeding, the long day is filled. Is that what you're thinking? Is that what you see? Then open your eyes, nurse. You're looking at me. I'll tell you who I am as I sit here so still, as I rise at your bidding, as I eat at your will. I'm a small child of 10 with a father and mother, brothers and sisters who loved one another. A young girl of 16 with wings on her feet, dreaming that soon now our lover she'll meet. A bride soon at 20, my heart gives a leap, recalling the vows that I promised to keep. At 25 now, I have young of my own, who need me to build a secure, happy home. A woman of 30, my young now grow fast, bound to each other with ties that should last. At 40, my young sons have grown and are gone, but my man is beside me to see I don't mourn. At 50 once more, babies play round my knee. Again, we know children, my loved one and me. Dark days are upon me. My husband is dead. I look at the future. I shudder with dread. For my young are all rearing young ones of their own. And I think of the years and the love that I've known. I'm an old woman now, and nature is cruel. 'Tis her jest to make old age look like a fool. The body is crumbled, grace and vigor depart. There is now a stone where I once had a heart. But inside this old carcass, a young girl still dwells, and now and again my battered heart swells. I remember the joy, I remember the pain, and I'm loving and living life over again. I think of the years all too few, gone too fast, and accept the stark fact that nothing can last. So open your eyes, nurse, open and see. Not a crabbed old woman, look closer, see me. I've had trouble with that one. So I really like that one, and I can actually post it at the end or send it out to you guys if you'd like, but it's called See Me Nurse, if you ever want to read it again. Oh, just moving on to my next one here. There we go. So keeping in mind that the person that you may be advocating for or caring for is truly a person with a background and years of their own experiences, it becomes increasingly important to recognize subtle but important cues. Sometimes what comes across as a clear and obvious issue is something completely different. It's not always what it seems. A client of ours was in hospital trying to make appropriate plans for discharge. She was a 90-year-old woman, and the team was assessing her as having a mild dementia. She was misunderstanding questions, and therefore her answers seemed off the wall and inappropriate. However, as a proud and independent woman who had made it to 90, she did not want to admit that she couldn't hear. It turns out she was lip reading this whole time. She admitted this to Anne, however, in a quiet and private conversation, and this changed the plan completely. We were able to utilize an external device called a hearing amplifier, and she became a different person entirely. When hearing has been going for some time, the person can also lose the ability to process the information. So it's important to jump on this as early as possible so that processing ability doesn't get compromised as well. Eyesight, similarly, when eyesight starts to go, you may notice your loved one squinting more, avoiding reading where maybe they were an avid reader once upon a time, bumping into furniture or tripping more frequently, all of which would impact their ability to manage their calendar and day-to-day activities. It dulls their ability to navigate their physical space. It can introduce safety issues in the kitchen, problems with medication adherence, the list goes on and on. And some of these things may present as confusion, short-term memory loss, etc. So finding out if it is a sensory issue as opposed to a cognitive one is huge. Other little tools and gadgets can help in these situations, like if the person has a landline, there are phones that have buttons where you can pre-program people into those buttons and put a picture of their face, so there's no reading involved. And things like magnifying glasses to aid in reading if reading glasses aren't being properly utilized. big print prescription bottles, big print blister packs for prescriptions, oversized calendars on the wall. These can all make the difference, make all the difference in the world, and at the same time, buy that person back some of their autonomy. Ideally, appointments and checkups for eyesight and hearing should be done regularly, so at least annually, as changes can occur in these senses without us even really knowing. Interpersonal communication and reactions. You may find or notice that your loved one has been having stronger reactions to normal situations or whatever their normal has been, responses that are atypical of the person or inappropriate in the situation, as though the filters have gone or their filters have diminished socially. Perhaps they're quicker to anger. It's highly likely that there is something else at the root. You just might not know what that is yet. So looking at those cues is really important. Heightened stress is another one. The question always with someone who's behaving more high stress than usual is what's really going on? Is the person aware of the changes that are happening to them and seeing their independence dwindling? Has there been a recent diagnosis they've been given but haven't talked about with anyone yet? It's easy to make assumptions, and we usually do that based on our own knowledge and experiences, but we need to remember that in caregiver capacity or when you're the advocate, it's not about you. It's about figuring out what's going on and what's best for them. And recognizing that heightened stress and more extreme reactions could indicate something deeper going on. The key is to ask questions and use everything you know about the person to try to give the benefit of the doubt and find the root of the issue. And this will help you and the individual to find appropriate support for their particular scenario. It's hard to find the right supports if you don't really know what you're trying to address. So one of our more fun topics here. Within complex family dynamics, I mean, this really just scratches the surface of some of the things that people run into. The first 3 points pose a very colorful array of challenges in a family dynamic. Then when you add things as stressful as later life transition, health deterioration, and planning for inevitable change to the mix, it will let the games begin. When navigating complex family dynamics with regard to helping and advocating for an elderly family member, there are a few key questions that you can ask. And you don't need to know it, kind of ask yourself to begin with. It's who does this person trust and want to advocate for them? So it's kind of touching on what we did in session 2. Who has power of attorney? There needs to be that one person who is the focal point for planning, but the client or the patient needs to be the one to determine who that is. So has that been determined? Is that person selected yet? And really, who knows this person the best? We talk a lot today about getting to the root of the problem and empathy and being a strong advocate. Well, part of that is knowing what triggers could be for people and where the sensitivities are. And that's almost like a magic. It's almost like a magical power in these cases. In our experience, it's the person who's available emotionally, physically, and who has the person's trust who advocates for the client or loved one. This could be a family member or close friend. In a blended family, it could be a stepson, stepdaughter, in-law. Again, the title or position in the family really doesn't matter. Family members also may come to the table with varied religions, traditional practices, cultural norms, and values that may differ from each other. So just again, another thing to navigate and really kind of work on together to make sure that the common goal is being focused on. Generally speaking, the person who does know the patient best will be the one who knows what small, seemingly innocuous triggers exist and can recognize how to sidestep them. Maybe mom or dad had an abusive childhood and doesn't like physical touch. Maybe your loved one grew up idolizing a sibling and feeling inadequate, so needs a little extra boost of confidence before making major moves or major decisions. Maybe your elderly parent had a scary or negative experience with long-term care for their own parent, or a negative experience in a hospital setting, and now assumes that every facility will be exactly that way. Even generational differences in norms can be navigated in a kind and loving manner. If all parties agree to communicate and cooperate lovingly and in the best interest of the person in question, we deal with families all the time that have to navigate the challenge of acclimating a loved one in their 80s or 90s to the norms of today's world, today's healthcare climate, and accepted social decorum. It can be so tempting to meet the old adage, well, back in my day, with a staunch, well, we're not in your day, but that gets you nowhere fast. And you actually increase your chances of reaching the end goal by taking a step back and trying to view the situation through their lens. Substance abuse and addiction add another twist to an already complex scenario, but what is that really more than knowing the person that you're dealing with, knowing what experiences they've had with substance abuse, if any, and what has the potential to be a challenge for them in higher stress times in life. At the end of the day, the biggest tool we can provide to you is this. Always, always, always present the story in a way that works for them. So whether that is for the person who we're trying to help transition through the system, whether it's in a way that makes sense to them, your other family members who maybe are looking for information or want to have sort of a decision-making capacity, we're always trying to frame it in a way that works for our audience. For mental health challenges, we could certainly spend a whole day talking about how each of these line items affects the aging process and later life transitions. But unfortunately, we are not mental health professionals and we don't have a whole day. But signs of mental health challenges that you can keep an eye on in these scenarios would be things like changes in mood, as we talked about, reactions to things, changes in mood, energy level, appetite, difficulty sleeping or sleeping too much, difficulty concentrating, increased worry or stress, anger, irritability, or aggressiveness. So again, if topics are being approached from a different angle that you're not used to seeing, there might be something happening in the background we don't know about. Sadness or hopelessness. And then, of course, if there are any thoughts or talk of death or suicide, clearly that's a huge red flag, which we can see when we get into issues of social isolation and that kind of thing in the elderly is quite pervasive. So just a few things to keep an eye on. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, though. Empathetic techniques. Psychologists believe that people are born with the capacity for empathy, but it is still mostly a learned behavior. The fact that empathy can be learned is good news, because even if your own background was not one that helped cultivate this skill, it's never too late to get back to it. I love the quote that we've got here. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Always love this, but how many of us actually put this into practice? I don't know about you, but I have to remind myself of it a lot. So I've got a lot of things I want to say, but what it really comes down to is in empathetic techniques within elder care and advocacy, listen more than you speak, ask questions. Ask so many questions, learn, then learn some more. People are very complex and there's always more to learn. And then offer help before it's asked. And this is part of empathy because we know studies show that almost 75% of people are reluctant to ask for help. For those people, asking for help may feel like giving up control or independence, autonomy. However, as people get older, routine tasks that they once did unassisted will often require help. It's always that sort of that tricky time period where things are becoming more difficult, but often people in their senior years will wait to ask for help until after a crisis has occurred. So we're trying to sort of help you find where that balance is. And it's okay to offer, even if the answer at that time is no. Even if you keep getting no's, it's better to kind of put it out there so that they don't have to put it out there for themselves. And you might get a yes. Why questions matter? Well, particularly in advocating in a hospital or facility setting, the key is really to finding the right person who has the authority and the respect of the team to make plans that actually work for your loved one. In the facility setting, so whether it's a long-term care home or the hospital, generally speaking, the right person has to be employed by that facility so that they actually have decision-making capabilities. Could be a nurse navigator, social worker, discharge planners if there is one in that facility. I don't know if you remember in session 1, we talked briefly about a client of ours that went to the Heart Institute and had quadruple bypass open heart surgery. And he was being discharged just leading into the Labor Day weekend. So he was told that he was surgically ready to be discharged. However, as we were heading into the long weekend, no one was available to admit him to the convalescence facility for another 3 days. And in the meantime, his wounds opened up, a whole host of other challenges arose, but it was the social worker in this particular case who was able to stop the early discharge from happening. In talking with her, we knew we had the right person when she quietly and wryly admitted, "It's okay. They're all scared of me. We'll make this happen." So that was how we knew that we had the right person to kind of push through something that was really very important to our client's safety in that case. The key, though, was that we had met with her ahead of the surgery, gained her respect, and established advanced directives and open dialogue all the way along. So while right questions, right time, right people also applies in familial discussions, it's imperative to find the people who can help you achieve that end goal. And while right time can be tricky, it truly goes back to the concept of proactive planning. So had we not been in touch with the social worker ahead of time, I don't think it would have gone quite as smoothly because we would have had to establish that relationship while that clock was ticking. So I know you've heard us say it before, but proactive is better than reactive. Diffusing difficult situations. So this is probably where we spend most of our time when talking to and helping families who are clients of ours, but also families in hospice. This is a big, messy topic to take on. So we're going to do our best to give you as many tips and tricks as possible. Take a breath. Remember that it is almost never personal. So let's say we're in a scenario where there's sibling tension around the care of an elderly parent. And that elderly parent has actually been having some cognitive decline of their own. Take a breath. How can you be mad at someone who is in turmoil or has mental health issues? Almost no one tries to upset their loved ones on purpose. Have an out-of-body experience. This one, by this I mean, actually envision yourself leaving your body and looking at the situation through neutral, objective eyes. My dad used to tell us when we were kids, pretend you have to explain this to a Martian who has just landed on Earth. It sounds a little silly now, but it's a useful tool in forcing your brain to see things from a neutral perspective, because we can get really mired and really lost in our own emotions and opinions. Listen and respond with love. I know this is not a new concept, nor is it all that creative, but man, is it effective. Difficult situations are more often than not fueled by high emotion and an influx of chemicals that make it hard to see straight. But a loving approach with kindness and understanding can help extinguish the emotional fire, even if you have to do it intentionally and purposefully. If you're still angry, you might have to kind of fake this one a little bit just till you kind of get over that hump. This next one, you poor unfortunate soul. Not like the song that the evil sea witch sings in Little Mermaid. No, this trick can come across a little bit controversial. And let me make sure you hear me when I say this. You do not say this out loud to someone ever. That is not what I'm suggesting. You don't. This stays in here. This is actually another trick from my childhood that, for me at least, has stood the test of time when it comes to diffusing angry, frustrated interactions with my loved ones. If you're encountering a family member, loved one, friend, anyone within the circle of care for the person you're advocating for, and you run into a scenario where one party is flying off the handle with anger or behaving in a hurtful way or letting their narcissism show, thinking this phrase in your head, thinking it in your head, let me say it again, can very quickly turn your own anger or defensiveness to care and concern instead. Similar to what we talked about in session 1 for approaching healthcare workers with confusion as opposed to aggression, approaching loved ones with concern or what I suppose sounds a lot like like sympathy in this case, acts like a bucket of water being poured all over that emotional fire that may be starting to get out of control. And please don't get me wrong, you poor unfortunate soul does not have to be what you actually think or feel about the person in question. You likely don't truly feel sorry for them. But what we want to do is make your brain believe you do, just long enough for the fire to go out. You got to take control of the brain chemicals. And I've found it very effective. I hope you do too. And it's not meant to insult anybody because you don't say it out loud. The second last one here, less is more. Do not overwhelm. Use the KISS theory. Keep it simple, silly. It may feel tempting when you're helping someone navigate later life health transitions to take all those great questions and ideas you have and throw them all out there in a stream of word vomit. It can feel very therapeutic to get it out of your mind and onto someone else. The trouble with that approach is that it can be so overwhelming for your loved one that it can cause them to shut down, purely due to being overwhelmed by information on top of what is already burdening their mind and emotions. We had a client whose mom received a cancer diagnosis, and she went into full planning strategy mode, sending ideas and doctors and solutions and trials and facilities at her mom over about a 2-week period. By the end of the 2 weeks, her mom was avoiding her calls, not because she wasn't appreciative, since everything our client was doing was from the most loving place, but because she hadn't had a chance to process the emotions of the diagnosis and wasn't ready to strategize yet. By all means, make lots of notes and keep track of all your ideas. Just to be strategic with how and when you present them is the key. You have to kind of pick your timing. And in cases where you're helping someone with dementia or cognitive decline, if a discussion starts to go sideways and you notice that the stress level of this person, of your loved one, is increasing, something as simple as changing the subject or ending the conversation just for now can be enough to reset the mood and tone long enough to try it again later, but maybe with a different approach. It can kind of give you that little bit of a pause that you need to reset. It's okay not to agree on everything. Let's be honest. The world today, and for the last long while, has had a great many events, situations, crises that have proven to be extremely polarizing for people. In caregiving situations and family communication, the chances of all parties agreeing on everything are extremely low. And that's okay. That is okay. Remember, we talked in the first couple sessions about having a point person who keeps notes and up-to-date information. The role of that person, and maybe that's you, is to keep everyone's eyes on the prize. We want to keep the eyes on the prize, the end goal, goals of care, whatever you want to call it. But what if we don't all agree on the end goal, you might ask? How many times do we hear about adult children who disagree on where their parents should be living or how they should be living, treatments they should or should not receive? I'll remind you what we told you in session 1. If your loved one is capable of making their own decisions, you need to let them. It's not easy. People make bad decisions all the time, but it's truly okay to disagree sometimes, as long as everyone can find a way to work toward and or get on board with that common goal. And that goal will likely change and morph along the way anyway. So it's really just about taking that step back, take a breath, come at it from a loving standpoint that knows that we all want the best for this person. Now, how do we make it happen? So I've got another video clip here for you. This is a short clip from a talk that Amy O'Rourke, a certified care manager and master of gerontology and public health, put on. And she touches on the communication style that often occurs between elderly parents and their adult children. So this one, again, is a little bit loud, so I'll give you a chance to put those volumes down. I'm just going to see if I can catch it here. So let me take you over to. Good. There we go.
Second is knowing some ground rules. Now, this picture is lousy. It's very grainy, very grainy. But I kept it up here because the woman, Doris, used to work for me. and Richard works in our office, and we had them stage the picture as role reversal. Ground rule number 1, role reversal. Get this in your mind, 3 words. You ready? Big, fat, lie. Role reversal never should happen. We never become our parents' parents. And if you try, you won't do so well. Try it. Go ahead. So Doris is sitting here, and we're doing this shot in my office, and Doris is squirming and she's mad. And I think she's really getting into this like it's a role play or something. She's into it. We get halfway through the shot and she's really mad. She says, "My daughter Connie talks to me that way and I can't stand it." Wow. I wouldn't want to be Connie. So a few weeks later, I get a call from Connie. And Connie says, "Thank you for the experience you gave my mother at your office." She called me up and she said, "Connie, you give me so much. You help me so much, but I don't like how you talk to me. I don't like it. You boss me around." And Connie heard her. She said, "Thank you. I know I do it, and I'm going to work on it." And the 2 of them are forging a new way of relating at this time of life. And I felt so happy for them. My friend Carol, who has an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and parents, father with Alzheimer's and a mother with mental illness, says, "Amy, that's not right. I do tell my parents what to do." I said, "No, Carol, you don't. You don't. You are responsible for them, but you have worked on a way of communicating to help them manage this time of life without insulting them by telling them what to do. And it takes some work." Ground rule number 2.
So we really liked how she framed that as well. We frequently get asked the question, how do I make my parent do this? How can I make my parents do that? But as we've talked about before, you often can't make them do something. You can help them navigate through their journey. And it really just comes back to the approach, the style of communication, and knowing that person and knowing what works for them and what doesn't. And then utilizing those things to help you get to that final goal. How's our time here? We are marching along. Okay. I've got our usual sort of key takeaway slide here for you. First and foremost, know your person. Not your person the way that Grey's Anatomy would have you think of it. In this case, this is whomever you find yourself helping and advocating for. Knowing idiosyncrasies, likes, dislikes, and triggers can make you an advocacy expert when your person needs it the most. Respect the gravity and importance of someone's routine. Routine is important for adults and older adults because it provides predictability and comfort. It reduces stress levels, improves emotional well-being. It also supports good sleep quality, efficient care coordination, memory support, and ultimately leads to a higher quality of life, as a feeling of independence can be maintained longer than without. Constantly frame everything, and I mean constantly frame everything as, how would I feel if this were happening to me? Golden rule, come to life. And kind of like what we talked about in past sessions around asking healthcare workers, what would you do if this was your loved one? It's really very powerful. Again, not a new concept, but powerful. Approach, tone, and style are everything. If ever there were a time to live your best sales life, it's this. I don't mean sales in a pushy way, but rather that if you know your customer, so your customer, in this case, your loved one, and you have the end goal clearly laid out, you will get there faster and easier with the right approach. Sounds overused, but love, kindness, and the benefit of the doubt will be your superpowers as a healthcare advocate. Finding your own way to get there is up to you. Use your own support people to give you strength. We all know that caregiver burnout is real, which is why this last point is so important. Emotions are a powerful thing and can take over in an instant. Knowing where your own sources of comfort, validation, venting, security are is what will provide you the foundation and support needed to provide strong and kind advocacy. Remember, put your mask on first. The last informational slide here, I'm not going to read through it with you. We're going to get to the Q&A really soon, but you do have a printable version. So even if you just wanted to have this as a bit of a takeaway, a bit of a, fast reference, then hopefully that will be helpful for you. And any questions following the webinar, of course, you can email, text, or call us with any of your own sort of personal questions that maybe we couldn't get to on this one. All right. And I think that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather, for that incredibly insightful presentation. So we're going to switch things up a little bit as we lean into our Q&A and invite your counterpart, Ann Russell, to join us. So if you have any questions to our audience, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. And I'd like to welcome and introduce Ann Russell, who's just joined us for this segment, a registered nurse in her early 20s, a graduate of public health nursing certificate, which she's received from the University of Toronto, and started out at the Red Cross Outpost Hospital in Minden before finding her favorite role as a discharge planner at Oakville Trafalgar Hospital about 30 years ago. She's gone on to roles such as nursing supervisor and hospice RN before becoming a champion family consulting client and care coordinator. So welcome, Ann.
Thank you.
So we're going to just maybe tackle our first question here, if that's okay. Not sure if you wanted to take down your slides, Heather, if you feel comfortable doing that. So the question reads, my father's health is declining. Though he has been quite independent up to this point, but knowing how long the wait lists are, I've tried to be proactive and talk to him about options for the future. Wow, really difficult conversation to have. But he becomes instantly defensive, he becomes angry and refuses to talk about it. So what do I do?
That's a very good question. And that happens a lot. But we have an elderly family friend, and we might have mentioned him in one of the other webinars, but he's 91 years old, and now he's declining physically and mentally. And now I'm getting panic phone calls every now and then because he can't remember if his son's been there, but he left, and this fellow didn't remember. So he's waiting for him to come back in the door, and he's worried about him. And he's admitting to me that he's now having trouble with sort of basic activities of daily living. He's having trouble getting dressed, and he wouldn't admit that to anybody else, but he was to me. And sometimes I'll find 2 pair of jeans that he's wearing, or the same clothes day after day, and he doesn't want anyone to know because he's very proud and he's fearing sort of his loss of independence, but he's aware that he is losing it. So he's resisting asking for help because he's always been that kind of guy where he just doesn't want anyone to know, and he doesn't want to ask. He has trouble asking for help. So responsibly, we've really felt that we need to put some backup plans in place. And this, could be a problem with someone like this because he's beyond the retirement home level. So it means long-term care papers. And I do see the potential for a crisis happening. He's living alone. We have help coming in, but he doesn't really want to accept very much help. So we're kind of in a bit of a pickle. So I called Ontario Health at Home, and they came and set up a couple of meetings. And the 2 meetings were to get to know him, to interview him, to do a capacity assessment to see if he was capable of making his own decision about this. And this lady was lovely, probably been a nurse for 20 years. So she was used to doing this. So I had a chat with her before and I said, there's going to be a problem if you speak to him very much about actually nursing home and using that term, because this is a trigger for him. And he remembered putting his mom into a nursing home many years before, and it was very traumatic for him. He had a close relationship with her, and she had Alzheimer's, and I was there when he had to take her there, and it was very difficult, and he hasn't forgotten that. So she came and she established a good rapport with him at the home, and I was present. But in order for him to cooperate with this, I explained to him, basically, honestly, that we needed to do some backup planning just in case, but that it would really help me if I could sit in and he would cooperate with this and see her, because I needed to get up to date with what the whole system was. And he's always been someone that wants to help others and also help me because I've been helping him. And it just made such a difference. And he cooperated, and he was great until the N word came up. And I'd warned her, and I guess she has standard questions, like 65 questions that she needed to ask. And as soon as she got into nursing homes and did he understand what that was? And I was in the other room because I wasn't supposed to be really present. And I could just hear his voice slowing down, answers getting shorter. And then he stopped, and she said to him, "You've stopped talking, haven't you?" And he said, "Yup." And that was the end. But she got what she needed. And I think because I know him so well, and it was helping me, that was not a lie, but that was the way that I was able to engage him in what we really needed him to do. So at the moment, his name is on 3 nursing homes that are nearby. The waiting lists are very long, so I have no worry that they're going to call him before he or we are ready. But at least that homework has been done. And
So
that's how we did it.
So it really goes back to the idea of framing it in a way that is important and impactful to them and motivates them. So knowing what intrinsically motivates the person is hugely valuable. And I was saying to Anne, he's a plumber by trade. He ran a plumbing business for many, many years. And we're looking at getting some home care to come in to see him a couple times a week. And I said, well, maybe we let him know that he needs to help these guys that are coming in because they're apprenticing in their new role as PSW. He was an apprentice himself. He apprenticed many other young people in his plumbing career. So things like that, where you're not pulling the wool over somebody's eyes, you're just framing it in a way that makes sense to them and makes them want to drop that guard. And that's really what it comes down to is, and for that question that was asked, maybe finding some of those intrinsic motivators and getting creative. It's a lot of creativity, getting creative with how you can sort of use the language in a way that is honest, but also motivating.
Respectful.
Yeah, it's definitely, it sounds like, this is really about meeting our loved ones where they're at. Right? Getting down to their level, speaking their language, having the eye contact, having that compassion. You had a number of key takeaways of like putting yourself in their shoes, which is, drives that empathy component in us. And so, yeah, quite impactful. We've got another question that's come through, and I'm mindful of our time. So if it's okay, I could just maybe go ahead and read the next one. So, how can someone who is the sole caregiver for the parent, for a parent who has significant cognitive decline / dementia, the parent lives in a nursing facility, I guess, currently. So how do we keep the responsibilities from entirely absorbing and overtaking, their life? I guess that the individual who's the sole caregiver.
So this person has a family member who's actually in a facility.
It seems that way, and there's quite a number of,
there's still a number of responsibilities that are falling on the loved one despite the facility being there. Okay.
You got it.
Selling a house and getting rid of items as well as personal care and appointments and that sort of thing. We've done that with various people and just trying to delegate, and anything that you can delegate to someone else. It might even be having somebody else do some of the visits. You know,
Yeah.
people that are in facilities really need someone, and the outside, you know, if they're able to go out, someone to come and take them out. Either
Yeah.
hire, if you can, an extra, because there's not a lot of personal attention that people get when they're in facilities, but that can be hired, or just delegate to various family members. Just that one point person we talked about, that person could say, let's not all visit on the same day. You
Right.
visit on Monday, and you visit, and I'll visit on Fridays, and, you know, just spread out some of the work.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because spreading out visits and delegating to other people is great, because it becomes quality, well, maybe not quality over quantity, quality and quantity, where you don't have to have big family gatherings at the bedside. Like if you do
Right.
15 minutes here, half an hour there, and it's different people who can just come. I mean, we know, particularly following COVID, what social isolation does
Absolutely.
to everyone, but you know, then you add a nursing home facility or long-term care facility into the mix, and it's even worse.
Some of the facilities have PSWs or helpers that will do things on the side so that you can pay them something, not a huge amount. But if you see there's a relationship and a bonding happening, then ask that person if they could come and do a little extra visit on their days off or at the end of a day.
And the only other thing I'll say is that it was sounding like in the question as though it's sort of taking over life, unfortunately, is a reality for a lot of people. Sometimes making a list of things that you know will have to be dealt with in the coming weeks and months, like Anne touched on downsizing, and if there's a home to be sold, or anything like that you know is coming up, write it into a list so that it becomes less scary, because now it's not all doing this. But then with each line item, determine which ones don't have to be done by you, because there will be some, there will be items that you just have to do because no one else can. But dollars to donuts, there will be some that you can delegate, but then figuring out what that list looks like can take away a lot of the stress.
Yeah, so it sounds like that you know, this question really is directed to this incredible awareness this individual, this caregiver has with regards to the responsibilities, their awareness around caregiver burnout. And so you mentioned some key things. Your key takeaways is like, you know, fill your cup, like have your own support people, right? So that you can continue to do the most valuable thing for this loved one that you have. And so I hear both Heather and say, like, you know, itemize a list, you know, get your to-dos together, you know, resource or allocate some of those responsibilities. Maybe the most important ones you keep for yourself, but you kind of shift that you know, responsibility or focus onto other people, so they can kind of like pick up the pieces for you, and so that therefore you can kind of like keep going anyway.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So we've got another question here. I'll try to squeeze this in before we close off our session. I'm struggling to help my eldest sibling lately, as there are many mental health challenges in our family. And my parents were always the ones responsible for him. They're no longer able to take on this responsibility, but I don't know how to gain his trust to be able to, like, you know, take over this role. So help.
Yeah, the mental health issues are very difficult to deal with. I have a nephew who's 26 years old, and I have been dealing a lot with him lately because he's on the autism spectrum, but he has a host of other mental health disabilities. And he's very high functioning, so he comes across as able to do things, but he really isn't. So the expectations that people have of him are not realistic. So it makes a lot of people very angry trying to deal with him. And then he gets angry and shuts down and things don't happen. So it's been a very difficult situation, but I seem to be one of the two that he trusts. And this has been going on for quite a long while. And I try to step back and, you know, let other families sort of step in. But I think, you know, he listens to me and shows up for appointments. He allows me to help him with personal care and housekeeping help when I can. And I've been trying to figure out why that is and how you establish that. But what I've done is that I treat him with respect. He's 26 years old, and even though he doesn't really function like a 26-year-old, I'm trying to sort of help him move in that direction, and it's like baby steps, really. But I ask him for his thoughts and his permission. He's very bright and he's a really great problem solver, but he admits to needing help with remembering to take his meds, and remembering and how he's going to remember appointments. And he's actually asking for help now. So I've provided him with a large calendar, and he and I together put it on the wall where he thought it should go. And then we put his meds onto the side of that. And when he's sitting at his big computer, he looks up and there's his calendar on the wall. So, you know, it's like it's right in his face. But together we did that. And I think the key that I have always used and seems to work is when I introduce an idea or I want to take him somewhere and maybe do something after, I say to him, is that okay?
Right. Yeah.
Are you okay with that? Is it okay? Is this okay? And invariably, because I'm asking, and sometimes I say, oh no, I don't think I can do that today. And I said, well, that's okay. Then do you want me to call you tomorrow? Would that be okay? And he'll usually say yes, and he's just on board. But I think he appreciates not only positive feedback, which I give him when he's done something positive and completed something, which has been devoid in his life, but he also appreciates just being included in the planning, but being asked. And that's been the secret, the key. And I think for most people that have been going through a lot of that emotional stuff for years, they just appreciate when somebody listens. Again, it's that listening. It keeps coming.
So it's yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Heather, go ahead.
It's that approach to say, does this work for you? Is that okay with you? It's huge respect without pushing. And it's what Amy on the video was talking about. Like, yes, you can help guide and control people, but not by bossing them around. And like, that doesn't work.
And I would even say just, gauging that response, which was incredibly insightful, is, co-authoring solutions together with our loved ones really gives them ownership over what's happening with them, their treatment, steps forward, and validates maybe their need, right?
He said exactly that it validates. He just has never had validation. That's exactly the word he used.
Yeah. Beautiful. I know we're at time, but I'm going to be a little bit selfish and ask the last question. And for those that are willing to just stay on just another few more minutes. So the last question here is, a lot of questions in the chat about like dealing with aging parents, being fearful and very resistant to the idea of going into like long care treatment facilities or retirement homes. So many of these folks are also mentioning dementia and mental health. Any suggestions on how to change the narrative? And I think we've heard some already, but anything else that we can maybe do to contribute to changing that narrative when we have these discussions?
I know that we talked in either one or two about the strategy of, and I'm thinking of the parents who have dementia at any point in the dementia journey, the idea of taking them on the sort of quick little day visits and the going over for tea and checking out a few places and almost just kind of dipping the toe in the long-term care pot, because I know in a lot of cases, facilities are so well set up with, what did they used to call, when I worked at Sunrise, it was the reminiscence floor. They always have different names, but if you could set it up where they could do a visit and focus in on an activity that has been very impactful and important for that person. So if they were a carpenter or a seamstress or a really into art and crafts, baking, and if there's a way to find a way to go in and do little day trip jaunts with them at these places, it can really help to kind of ease them in and show them that it can be quite positive and it can really tap into what's important to them.
Sometimes there's day programs that actually are on site at some of the nursing homes. And that's what we did with that 91-year-old's mom years ago. She was in a day program for a long time, and they had they had a greenhouse and they had all kinds of things, and she really loved it. So when it came time that her name came up on the list to go, which was quite appropriate timing, she was already familiar in that place.
And depending on cognitive awareness and processing, having conversations that can dispel the idea that once I move, that's it for me. I'm done. I stop being me. All my independence is gone. I'm no more autonomy.
And I won't see you.
And I won't see you anymore. I won't see my friends. Having a lot of really open, honest dialogue about those fears, and then exploring together ways that you can combat those things from, like, keep those things from happening, I think goes such a long way with people. Because if you were to ask any of us here today how we'd feel about moving out of our home and routine into somewhere else, like, I can't imagine it ever feels good looking at that.
Right.
So
nobody wants to
nobody
change.
wants to do that.
Absolutely.
So look at what is causing the fear, and then truly validate that and say, let's think of ways that we can avoid that from happening.
Sure. So I just want to thank you both. It appears that that's all the time we have. We've gone a little bit over. And to our audience, we received a lot of questions today, and we apologize if we weren't able to get specifically to yours. We hope that you found this webinar series useful and that you enjoyed today's presentation. And on behalf of the University of Toronto, Mississauga, I'd like to thank Heather and Anne for their time today and thoughtful responses to these questions from our alumni audience.
Good luck, everyone.
And can I say too, since it is our final one, if you do have any questions that are really burning, do email us at admin@championfamilyconsulting.com. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
So everyone who registered for today's event will receive a link to the recording in their inboxes in the coming days. And along with the recording, you'll have the opportunity to take an online post-event survey. And we really do hope that you take a couple of minutes to complete the survey, as it really helps inform some of the future events that we want to plan. And if you enjoyed today's webinar, be sure to check out our upcoming events listing on our UTM alumni webpage. And that's kind of, all of those links are posted in the chat at the bottom of your screen there. And so thank you everyone again for joining, and we look forward to hosting you at another U of T Mississauga webinar. Have a great afternoon.